All right, everyone. Thank you and welcome to this awesome webinar hosted by Voicify. Sorry, I'm Jamie. I'm from the MoDev team, also working on voice, and your temporary captain of the hour. We have today's webinar is your customers are using their voices to interact with your brand. Are you listening? And we're joined here by three distinguished gentlemen. We've got Jason Fields, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Voicify. We've got Scot Westwater, who's the Insights Director at Vixen Labs, and also Kevin Greenwald, who's a VP of Strategy and Business Development at Odyssey. Thank you, all three of you gentlemen, for joining. Just a couple of housekeeping notes from me. Like the chat's open, if you want to use the chat to interact with each other, please do. There's also the Q&A button down in the bottom of your screen. If you have questions that come up that you want to throw at these three, we'll come back at the end and run those by the guys and let them answer in whatever order or capacity that they want. I think that is good for me, but I think I'm going to hand it over to Jason at the moment.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. What we'll do today is Scott and I have collaborated over the past few weeks in preparation for this to unpack some metrics that influence the shift of where consumers are expecting assistance to be in their personal worlds. And there was research that Vixen did in conjunction with a couple of other organizations over the summer. And what we're going to do is we're going to unpack some of those statistics, and then I'm going to parlay some of that data and information into some pragmatic approaches to address the shift and some examples of brands that are doing just that for you. So Scott, I'll leave it to you to jump into some of the research that you guys did.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Thanks everyone for joining. This is actually really exciting to be able to share this information with folks from all over the world. Like Jason said, this is actually research that we conducted earlier this year. And this is actually the second time we've done this format. So last year we did the 2021 edition, and we ran largely the same research study to see how the demographics have shifted, how behaviors have shifted, et cetera. So we did this work in partnership with the Open Voice Network, and it's sponsored by Veritone and SEC Newgate. And the piece itself, the research itself, was delivered by Delineate, which is a research firm based out of the UK. So if we move on to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of makeup of the research study, just so you see how robust it was, we conducted we did 6,000 people across 3 different markets. So we did 2,000 in the US, 2,000 in the UK, and 2,000 in Germany. And really wanted to get a sense of the differences between the different markets. And so Germany being a little bit newer of an entrant into voice assistance from a lot of the bigger platforms, the US being a little bit longer standing, we wanted to see how the trends are lining up, how they're different, and really just have that data. We also really took a deep dive into 4 main industries. So we did retail, healthcare, entertainment, and as part of retail, consumer packaged goods as well. So I have data that's not in this presentation, but we actually did conduct research into the behaviors that people want specific to those different industries. So what are the tasks they're trying to complete? How can voice actually make a difference for them? And so really, as we start to get into it, a lot of the behaviors that happened during the pandemic have really stuck. So it's really now time to put voice to work. So as the world has unlocked and people are turning more and more to this conversational technology, it's really to help them navigate their hybrid personal and business lives. So we're seeing a lot of behaviors that are actually happening both, at home or out on the go, but also potentially in the office space. So the nice thing is, so we do see these behaviors that were established now actually accelerating and becoming more and more frequent. So to really just jump into it, on the next slide, we have our 3 main players here. And so what we see is Alexa, Amazon Alexa has actually increased in usage from 21 to 22. And it's about 6% increase in usage. Siri actually dropped slightly, just about a 1%. So that's all within the margin of error. And then also looking at Google Assistant, we actually did see Assistant actually go up about 5 percentage points in usage. So these data points are all self-reported. But we do see an increase in the big three platforms or the two big platforms, and then Siri, basically holding tight there. On the next slide, we also see that people are using voice assistants, and so it's not assistants. On mobile devices, they're using it on smart speakers, they're using it in the car, on their headphones, and even on other devices. So having voice assistant built into, say, a coffee maker or any IoT devices. So we do see a very large percentage of people here in the States using voice on their smartphone, but also on the smart speaker. And the kind of the big aha here is it is more than smart speakers is the opportunity when it comes to voice. So while that was kind of the stepping stone and got a lot of us really excited about voice and what the possibilities were, we do see a lot of usage and a lot of interest on the mobile side. So building it specifically into mobile applications and even into websites. So that's some of the data that we'll get into in a little bit. But the point is, it goes well beyond smart speakers. So brands need to consider voice as an ecosystem, not just considering it as part of the speaker play specifically. The other thing that we're seeing is a pretty significant increase in the multiple times a day usage and daily usage. So again, I don't have the comparative numbers here, but we do see a larger percentage of people actually using their assistants multiple times a day in the US, UK, and Germany. We're also seeing the single, once a day kind of metric also increasing. So we've seen overall a big shift in people that maybe were dabbling last year are now using it more frequently. People that were using it somewhat frequently last year are actually doing it multiple times a day. And so again, this all points to this usage and this behavior has become ingrained, and people are actually using it for more and more things. So looking at the habits and routines that we started to identify, approximately 92% of the people that we talk to are actually searching the web with their voice, and about 40% are doing it regularly. And so now this isn't the magic 50% of all searches in the world, blah, 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 but we're finding of the people that have raised their hand and said, I'm using voice assistants, 92% of those folks are actually using voice to actually do some top of funnel search, but also looking for brands and products. So on the next slide, we actually see, which last year was a hypothesis, this year we've also confirmed, is this idea of the marketing funnel playing out in voice. So we asked these 5 questions in a series of about 25 tasks. And so they're all independent. They didn't necessarily line up in a funnel fashion. And it was anything from, asking a search engine question to ordering concert tickets to, checking out the weather. And so when we started doing the analysis, we started to see this very clear marketing funnel play out where people are asking top of funnel behavioral or top of funnel awareness type questions, and then moving into the searching for information on products, local businesses, brands, and then ultimately making purchases. And on the right-hand side of the chart, you can actually see how much those different pieces have grown year over year. I think the biggest one to note is actually making purchases has increased 18% year over year. So as people have done the ask a question, and that number remains largely unchanged from last year, we have seen more people getting comfortable doing that and then looking for more information. So information on products, brands, services, local business, things like that. And so this indicates to us that voice is very much primed for being part of the marketing funnel, and it's incumbent on brands to look at your customer journey and figure out how it might actually be able to improve certain pieces of that journey or enhance the experience. Not replace anything, because we don't believe that it's actually something that will completely replace it, but how do we use this to augment and enhance something that you're already doing? So on the next slide, we actually show here's the different industries, and here's the interest level when it comes to voice search. And so last year, weather, music, news, those were always at the top. They're up at the top this year again, but we're not seeing as much growth as we are in some of the other sectors. So retail is at 10%, food delivery and restaurants 13%, consumer packaged goods 13%, entertainment 9%. And so we're seeing, again, across the board, a tremendous amount of interest and usage when it comes to people using their voice to search. And so if your content isn't optimized for the website, if you're not actually being intentional with your voice assistant strategy, you're potentially missing out on a large opportunity that we now see behaviorally is happening before our eyes. So on the next slide. So the other thing to note is we're seeing about 30 to 33% of folks using mobile to actually do voice search and actually using that for information searching purposes. So again, this isn't just a smart speaker proposition or a multimodal smart speaker proposition. This is how do we actually look across the entire ecosystem, and something that Kevin and the team at Odyssey are actually looking at right now. How do we include voice assistants? And that's actually something that Jason and I have been working with Kevin and the team on, to actually bring voice into the Odyssey app and actually looking at how we can implement it throughout the entire ecosystem. On the next slide. So a couple other things that we wanted to really uncover and better understand. So we now know that people are using their voice to search and they're doing the brand searches and things like that, but really wanted to get a sense of, so if you did a voice search, where's the next likely place you're going to go? And so around 82% or so of folks last year and this year indicated that they're going to go to a brand's website. About 75% or so this year said that they're also going to go to a mobile application. A lot of people are still looking at YouTube, and so that's where they're going to look for product reviews and unboxing videos and things like that. But I think one of the other interesting areas here is number 4, continue to use that voice experience. So once you do that initial search, you want to continue to be able to get information using your voice. So this starts to, again, illustrate the need for brands to start investigating how voice can actually be built into existing infrastructure. How does it work into your mobile application? How can it work on your website? And really just be that next place that people go and still provide that assistance that you're doing on the voice search side of things, or even on the smart speaker side of things. Bring that through to your ecosystem to continue to reinforce that behavior and continue to make it easier for people to find the information that they're looking for. The other thing that we wanted to do is said, okay, well, if you're going to go to a website or you're interested in going to a mobile app, what do you want to be able to use your voice for? And so these are kind of the future casting things that last year we had hypotheses of and said, these are just kind of things we want to get a gut check on. This year, we're seeing clearly a lot of interest around the different topics of searching for a question that I have. So getting, voice search built into the app or into the website, being able to interact with some of the features. So looking beyond Siri shortcuts, Google app actions, and being able to physically control pieces of the application. And I know Jason's going to talk about this a little bit with our Odyssey experience, but being able to, layer on top an assistant onto an existing ecosystem and infrastructure to make it easier to get requests, find, in this case, music that you're looking for, and even save things to your list. The other thing to note is last year, we saw about 30% or so of people interested in interacting with a chatbot on the website or on the mobile application. That's actually increased significantly. So we're almost at 50% of people indicated that was also something that they wanted to be able to do. So again, there's a lot of data here that's pointing to it's a multi-platform or multi-endpoints delivery is what we should really be doing. And on the next slide, I think it really is kind of the encapsulation. It's really incumbent on us as stewards of the brand or internal product teams to really understand our customer's journey and to figure out how we can be intentional about applying voice in those specific moments to enhance the experience. So if our goals are acquisition focused, how does that play in and how can voice facilitate that? If it's retention, how can we use voice to make things easier, help people onboard into a product and ultimately experience it more? The other thing that we need to keep in mind is we have a lot of content that generally exists within these branded ecosystems. So we need to be consistent. We have to have our voice experiences be part of the overall arching content strategy so that we're not creating siloed experiences. They all feel like they're from the same brand or from the same product team. And ultimately, we're delivering value everywhere that we can. So that was, probably the fastest I've gone through this data. So if you have questions, definitely let us know in the Q&A section or in the chat. And we're going to transition over to Jason talking a little bit more about case studies and some real world examples of voice assistants being built into these different platforms.
Yeah, so it's a tremendous amount of data that informs where we are in the space. And what's really interesting is that it coincides with some shifts we've seen over the past few years. We all know that Siri didn't allow for a marketplace to exist. any interconnectivity with voice needs to be done with their Siri Kit capability to tie into native mobile application capabilities. Whether or not that's voice first within the mobile application, it doesn't really matter. We know that Cortana sort of took itself out of the mix a few years ago, and then just over the summer, Google announced that they're sunsetting all of their Google Actions and really focusing on simply entertainment and hardware controls. They essentially want to be the assistant for your home, basically, and not be concerned with being an expert on all of the brand content or experiences that all of you should be concerned with. So what that leaves us with is Bixby and Amazon Alexa. And Bixby, I think we can all agree, certainly by the numbers, has a very small portion of the market share of Assistant and is a little lackluster in its experience. And I'm a fan of Samsung, so I'm not trying to slight them at all. But Amazon Alexa really remains will remain the by and large assistant. And while nobody thinks they're going away, essentially Amazon Alexa is almost a beacon of an example about how a voice assistant can be integrated into other parts of a business. Because certainly Alexa is most interested in, if not previously, then certainly from a future state, driving people to their marketplace. And that is exactly what they're doing. Now, brands chose these systems originally to engage with because these systems brought a lot of capabilities with them that they didn't have to think about. And those are listed off here on the bottom. Hopefully these are terms that all make sense to you guys. I'm not going to unpack them in depth, but this is one of the benefits that all of these platforms brought to them. You didn't have to think about custom wake words or personalization or natural language understanding because those were native to the assistant themselves, like Alexa or Google. But what that didn't take into consideration was that companies and brands have a variety of other tools, digital and analog actually, where a voice interaction and a voice capability can bring a lot of value. And these are just a few of them. So it's not just about the assistant and the devices that assistant can sort of ship on, which, you know, with Alexa ranges from televisions to speakers to displays, it's set in phones and whatnot. But as a brand yourself, you have a variety of other channels that you're going to want to consider. If you're a QSR, it could be drive-through and telephony that are most important to you. If you're a consumer brand, it might be the social channels or even augmented reality or metaverse. Certainly web and native mobile come to mind as well. And the challenge that brands had historically was that bringing all of these capabilities to bear meant you had to go off and procure all of these systems separately and then burden your development team, which is already overburdened generally across the board, to blend all of these things together to make it work. Now, I'm not trying to sell you on Voicify, but this is why we're here, which is because we bring all of these things together, which is why brands tend to choose us. They don't have to go out there and worry about all of that. But one of the other things that's really interesting is that, and a couple of these Scott and I differ on just slightly, not that we get to into fisticuffs about it or anything, but so this is my thinking, which is that voice is shifting. And it's shifting from just voice to this idea of conversational AI, the idea that machine learning and artificial intelligence can be behind it. And we're a big proponent of that. Also, and this is one of the things that Scott and I have some nuance on, I think we're shifting from voice first to voice also. I don't think Scott disagrees in spirit to this, although I'm not sure he loves my language on it. But it's the idea of, rather than thinking of a voice first experience, thinking about how voice can also supplement all of the other digital tools and assets that you have. Which is a really important part of that customer experience. I think also, just like we saw with web and native mobile and social, we're seeing a shift from novelty to value, right? Some of the earliest websites decades ago were video cams on aquariums where you could go to a website and see somebody's aquarium from 6,000 miles away. That very quickly progressed into news outlets, banking, entertainment, et cetera, right? So we're now seeing voice move into that value prop as well. And we're shifting from a marketing approach to a revenue approach. Now, certainly marketing serves revenue, but we're seeing that revenue becomes a key question in terms of the kind of value it's going to bring to the experience itself. And then lastly, and as an exclamation point on what I just talked about, we're moving from lease to owned. So Alexa is interesting, perhaps based on your brand and your market share, it's not necessarily a channel you should ignore, but you certainly can't ignore all of the other channels that you own inside of your stack. So one of the things that we're observing is that, and I think a lot of consumer brands, and it's of benefit to any industry, is that the experience you have with your customer is it's overtaking sort of product and price as the key differentiator. You can sell things for cheap and they can be very good, but if the experience is poor, it's very difficult for people to want to stick with you for a long time. Well, in today's day and age, especially post-COVID, experience is technology. And you satisfy a lot of those experience checkboxes by having the right stack and the right capabilities and the right user interfaces, of which voice and conversational AI is certainly quickly becoming one of those. So the question becomes, well, how do we go about it? Now, brands exist on all sorts of different levels of maturity. I've taken an example of the Smithsonian, and this is their high-level customer journey. Not all brands have a visualized customer journey, but certainly from a customer experience standpoint, any brand, any marketing team or CX team would understand all of the touch points that you have with your consumer. And the exercise that we typically recommend, and I know Vixen goes through as well with their clients, is to essentially identify the moments in that customer journey where voice is applicable. Now, this will whittle down perhaps 1,000 touch points to 100 touch points, or 100 touch points to 10 touch points, and where voice can make a material difference to that experience. That doesn't mean you have to do all of those things. We use a term in our organization with our clients, sort of a workhorse conversation or a workhorse use case. There's going to be something at some point in your customer journey where the value to the brand and the value to the customer is so overwhelming that it becomes a really natural starting point in order to bring that voice user interface or conversational AI to bear. And that's the thing that generally most brands should start with. So, and when we talk about conversational AI, what we're talking about is the ability for the technology to understand context and content. And this is the key differentiator between conversational AI and chatbots. And the chatbots are still a good, I think, the litmus test. And we're interested to see that that number is ticking up to, close to 50% in the research that Scott and team did. But chatbot software itself essentially becomes a decision tree of information. And it doesn't become beneficial or active on part of the business or on part of the user. And that's because it doesn't have the concept of a natural language model or entity recognition tied to it. And this is the way that conversational AI works from a training standpoint, is where you start identifying the language that you're expecting or anticipating, so that the machine learning can get smarter about it. And this is one of the big differentiators between a lot of the technologies that are out there. So to jump into a couple of examples, Wolverine is a global shoe-wear company. They've got, I think, between 12 and 18 brands right now. And they wanted to bring an experience to across all of their brands where they could reduce some friction, with a pain point that they started experiencing very heavily during COVID, which was people calling their call center to understand where their orders were. And so they decided that the natural starting place for them was to, at the time, this was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to leverage Alexa and Google to allow their customers to ask them where their order was, or what they call Wizmo, where's my order? And so they did that across all of their brands, so that instead of having to call the call center, which they were getting very high traffic and very long wait times on, people could engage with the always on employee, which at that time was Alexa and Google. I should note that they're in the process of porting this over to other channels that they own so that people can do it there as well. The way that they landed on this was, obviously, you got to have an ROI conversation. I think everyone should be having an ROI conversation on voice. And for them, it was a pretty simple equation, which was, what's the channel volume across all channels by brand, times an expected channel shift from those channels into voice, times the engagement cost. So if they've got 4 or 5 channels where people can ask where their order on, and they've got 18 brands, and they expect a single % shift in year 1 at $3 per call or per email or through SMS, minus the license cost of the software, in this case it was us, they get their ROI, right? So they achieved in year 1 about $250,000 in savings, and they're expecting by year 5 for it to reach nearly $2 million in savings, right? That's a real easy decision when it comes to voice. And this is the sort of approach that we're proponents of when figuring out what to do. Another example is Msc Cruises out of Europe. They took the opportunity during the downturn in COVID, where none of their boats were sailing, to put a piece of their own hardware in every one of the cabins on their cruise ships, to take the burden off of the concierge and front desk staff, so that when their boat started sailing again, there was a way for their visitors to engage on a number of different subjects directly in their cabins without having to leave or without having to engage with a human being at a desk or waiting in queue to get the answer. They did this by doing an analysis of all of their logs from a concierge and front desk standpoint, as well as help desk, and identified the top 800 subjects that people were interested in finding information about, and then did an audit on all of the different languages that their the sailors spoke. And so what they ended up creating was an assistant that could handle 800 subjects that spoke Japanese, Chinese, Finnish, French, Spanish, English, the list goes on. And it was everything from the terrible example I've given here around where the buffet is to other logistics on the boat itself. A sort of less consumer-facing example, but one that I is a sort of a real feel-good and gets me sort of personally excited about what this technology can do, is what Houston Methodist is currently building out pilots for, which is the idea of putting a voice assistant inside of the operating theater's room, inside the software, so that, as we all know, operating theaters need to be very sanitary. Touching things other than the patient and tools, generally a no-no. And so the voice assistant conversational AI experience allows better tracking of procedures and processes, as well as note-taking, as well as access to information in a non-touch, non-screen-based experience, so that the surgeons and the nurses that are in the room can have access and control all the software they need to without actually lifting a finger to do so. A really strong use case. They're actually going to start piggybacking on top of this surgical arena use case by bringing voice assistants vis-a-vis tablets into patients' rooms with the doctor or the physician, assuming that the patient says yes to it, of course, so that notes can be better taken, access to information can be asked and verbalized not only by the physician or the nurse, but actually by the patient themselves when those consultations are happening. Really, really powerful use cases. I think it would be an oversight not to mention Bank of America as a leader in this space, obviously financial services, and they introduced Erica a couple of years ago, spent a ton of money very early on when it was expensive to get into this technology to put Erica inside of their native mobile app. They have had massive success with this, everything from sort of voice command and control, transfer money from here to there, pay a bill, that sort of thing, leaning into other subject areas as well, understanding what's happening in the markets, getting general recommendations on financial activities, that sort of thing. It is not only, I think it was initially born out to be a bit of an add-on. It is proven out to be actually a stickiness driver. People that use Erica inside of the native mobile app are coming back to the mobile app time and time again, and creating a higher usership and higher lifetime customer value with Bank of America because of brand affinity and overall engagement. Another example is with Zyrtec, which is part of Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals. And they, obviously allergy relief, if you don't know, I knew who they were because I suffer from allergies, but they actually have web and native mobile applications to allow people to find out what the allergy cast is, what they call an allergy cast for their area, so you know whether or not to take the product or the Zyrtec pill, but also understand what's coming and actually log what your symptoms are, so you can keep track of things from a journaling standpoint. And what they realized was that the native mobile and web experiences on this, not that they were terribly cumbersome, but they took quite a few steps and taps and swipes and whatnot. And it became a whole lot easier for people to simply ask what the allergy cast was, or to get a better understanding of what the allergens were, because they fancied themselves an educator as well. And so their first round of this, which happened just a year and a half ago or so, was to launch the Zyrtec allergy cast experience through Google and Alexa, and they did that. It's been successful to the point that they're actually now building into the roadmap, bringing it into the native mobile application, possibly the website, and they want to bring it into SMS, because don't forget, SMS is conversational. Even though it's text-based, it benefits from that conversational AI. And so what they're leaning into is putting their content, their value prop into every channel that can support it, so they can meet their customers where they are. A really nice analysis of sort of overarching customer experience work. And this last example, which is where I'll invite our guest Kevin Greenwald to pipe in here in just a minute, is with Odyssey. Odyssey is the second largest radio station holder in North America, formerly radio.com. They underwent a branding exercise last year or the year before, I believe. And they just recently relaunched their native mobile streaming application for iOS and Android. And as part of that, what they did was bring a voice assistant into that experience. In its first iteration, it is naturally a lot of that sort of voice command and control, still building machine learning and conversational AI through the analytics that come back through the requests into their own proprietary databases, but allowing people to do things like start playing a podcast or finding music. Really, it's a big discoverability play as well, adding to queue, those sorts of things, with a mind's eye to, in the future, really be able to take over even more subject matter rather than just the audio content they have, but actually the subject matter inside of the audio content to bring a new level of engagement and immersion to the user. So I'm going to pause here, and Kevin, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, because I think people are probably more interested to hear from you than they are from even Scott and I. When you guys were undergoing the revision to the streaming application, how did you guys land on voice being an important component for that?
Yeah, I think you sort of hit some of the key things there, Jason, around using it as a sort of command and control device to navigate content on the app. That, to me, is a use case that has become, well, first of all, the consumers are already engaging with our content in that way in the home. I think, for a long time being relative, at least to the existence of smart speaker devices like Alexa and Google Home, but the number one application of those has been to put on a radio station. Our content is some of the most popular content on smart speaker devices. So consumers are interacting with it this way already. So why not allow them to do it in the app as well? Audio is one of the great things about audio content is it's content that you can enjoy while doing other things. You can throw headphones in your ears and your mobile phone in your pocket and mow the lawn, paint a bedroom, do the dishes, whatever it might be, and being able to navigate that hands-free with your voice is becoming an increasingly natural thing. Consumers are adopting that functionality. So it just made a lot of sense for us as we redeveloped the app to give that capability to consumers in the app as well.
And you're one of the industries, being entertainment, generalized, that actually isn't affected by the Google Actions sunsetting, because they're keeping they still want to own entertainment in the home, and so they're maintaining those sorts of entertainment actions like yours. But now that you guys have added on to your own capabilities of voice interaction, conversational AI, how do you see that relationship between Alexa and Google changing, or do you, in terms of sort of what becomes more important to the business?
Yeah, look, those platforms are important partners, but those are huge companies. Dealing with them is always, sort of a delicate dance. I mean, in the media industry today, almost everybody has some sort of a frenemy relationship.
Yeah.
So, how that evolves is a little difficult to predict. You can never be sure what each of those companies' next move is. But we just continue to be thoughtful about, how we can deliver the best experiences for our customers any way they want to engage with our content. But also we're focused on the experience we can provide for them directly in our app, and trying to make that best in class so that, when they want to engage with audio content, they come to us. Yeah.
So you see it sort of as it is, and I'm a proponent of this, so I'm not trying to lead a horse to water, but you need to be wherever the end user wants to be, whether that's Google, Alexa, a web experience, a native mobile experience. You guys need to be present.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if you can speak at all to the direction you think voice is going to be taking with Odyssey in the future in terms of its adjacency or supporting nature to a lot of the other, graphical user interfaces that you guys are managing in the native mobile application.
Sure. So I think what we've done right now is the first version of our app that we relaunched this summer, and it was really important to us, as you stated, Jason, it was really important to us to have voice control as a part of that. I think we'll continue to develop that out, innovate on it, and try to make it better. We'll start to see more and more from the data that we gather from how consumers engage with us with their voice. What are the things that they're doing and that they like to do, and how can we make those experiences better? Something I noted earlier in Scott's presentation, the adoption of the 3 key assistants is very low in the car, which isn't too surprising because I think their presence in the car is still low, particularly Alexa. The Siri and Google are on a mobile device. Alexa's not. Now, obviously, you see it from the commercials and things like that. More and more cars are embedding it. But people own cars for a long time. So, when I think about our business and where we're going, radio and the car have always been, tied together. We were the media that was in the car. For a long time, we were the only media that's in the car. Now, as cars become more digital and more connected, there's a lot more media that consumers can access in the cars that we have to compete with, and we need to create a good experience in the car for listeners as well. So, people are focused on the road and their hands are occupied. So again, I think it's just a perfect place for voice to be the way for them to navigate and get to the content they want in the way they want to.
Yeah. You guys are, I don't know that your space is terribly crowded because there's a lot of big players around media streaming, especially the sort of content, podcast, radio, et cetera, that you guys are responsible for. But do you see voice as sort of a need to have in terms of where you see your competition going in the future, or do you think you're outpacing what's happening in some of those companies?
I think it's been, and this from our work together, Jason, it's been important to us to try to position ourselves among the leaders in the space with this. And, I think it is a need to have, for the reasons I stated earlier. I think, the consumers are interacting with media content this way. I came to Odyssey from Comcast, and the voice remote at Comcast, for those who live inside the Comcast footprint, that was a major initiative at the company, and the adoption of it by consumers was incredible. And I see it even in my own home. My children are so used to just picking up the remote, pushing the button, and talking to the remote to operate it. They don't push any of the buttons. They just get right to Netflix from the or whatever show they want with using their voice.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I don't even know what number my channels are on my Comcast set anymore because I'm just telling it to go to NBC or to find me the US Open.
Well, and it's funny because I actually had a conversation with one of the lead researchers at Comcast, and she actually attributed the voice remote technology to single-handedly contributing to a positive NPS score for the first time in Comcast's recent history. So it's definitely an example of something that was very utilitarian and was just to change channels initially. And now you can ask for, what's the movie where the dinosaur eats the lawyer, and you get Jurassic Park, and there's all kinds of other stuff that are part of it. But, it definitely has impacted the business and definitely impacted the NPS score, which was a really nice anecdote to hear.
Yep.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you giving us some insights into the Odyssey world and how you guys think through voice. There were a few questions that came up in our Q&A section, and I want to make sure we answer a few of them. Somebody asked, can you expand on the difference of voice assistant versus voice assistants and how that comes through in marketing? I think it's a really interesting way of phrasing the question, and Scott may have some words of thought on it as well. I think for me, I don't think that the idea of an owned voice assistant versus voice assistants need to be decoupled. But I think that the term voice assistant for so long now has been rooted in the idea of it being either Alexa or Google Assistant or Bixby or Cortana or Siri, that the idea of conveying that your brand is now leveraging the technical capability for themselves is a really important piece of information to market. And it should be, I've worked with some companies who treat the idea of conveying the capability of voice assistants for themselves as a campaign in and of itself, right? They think it's going to be such a differentiator that they actually want to run marketing just on that. The other approach is that it becomes a smaller piece of larger marketing campaigns, just like you would likely never put something out in the world without a visual reference to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or your website. Now too comes the opportunity to share through that same sort of communication style that there's a voice assistant or the capability of voice assistants within that brand's ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think, Jason, you actually provided, so just so everyone knows, we're writing a book on voice marketing. Jason has so graciously provided us with a perspective, and in his perspective, he talks about thinking of the assistant as an employee of the organization and almost writing a job description and talking about, here's the types of things this virtual employee will be able to handle. So being able to provide assistance to your end user using voice is really kind of the differentiator. So it's not about specific platforms, but it's being helpful in any touch point that your audience is actually using. And if you can actually embed voice assistants into it, you're going to, especially since we now know that people are looking for information, searching with their voice, things like that, you're going to provide a better customer experience. You're going to give them the information they need to make a decision or move further into the journey or whatever the objectives are. So it's just as much about providing useful assistance and helpful information as it is to be on an Amazon platform or the Google platform or any of the other bigger platforms that exist. And which is why I'm such a big proponent of Voicify and their owned assistant approach to be able to enable brands to embed them into mobile applications, onto websites, and really any endpoint that they want to deploy to.
Yeah. Another question we have: when a consumer uses voice search, which search engine offers answers? It's a little bit nuanced. It depends on how you're using voice search. If you're using it with Alexa, my understanding is that they still are using Wikipedia to try to give you answers. And that's because Alexa isn't an operating system or a search tool, and they don't have the same digital footprint that Google does. If you ask Google Assistant a question, they're certainly using Google Search as the index for that. It's a slightly different when you use voice search in like a Google search bar, because they have the microphone there, right? So that actually just goes directly against the Google search index, whereas the Google Assistant does try to do a layer of contextual relevancy against it that's a little bit different than just doing a speech to text transcription, right? So it does differ. You, as a brand, you can choose whichever you want. If you're a product brand, for instance, and you have a voice user interface on your website or your native mobile app, you may just simply tie the assistant to like your faceted search capability. So that you can bring up the right product, the right information at the right time. Or you could do sort of what that Google search bar microphone does, which is simply do speech to text translation and index against whatever search engine you've already got running on site.
Yep. And Amazon does use Bing on some of their voice search capabilities. But you're right, Jason, most of the stuff goes to Wikipedia. There's like a handful of websites that from a structured content standpoint are consistent. So if Amazon can't find the answer and provide it in a structured way, that's really why they're looking at Wikipedia, WebMD, and some of the other things that exist, because it's always better to provide some answer than say, I don't know. And so, that's another opportunity for brands to start to create that content and make sure that their content is indexing so that they actually show up and it doesn't have to go to Wikipedia. I don't know if this is still the case, but about a year ago, I did a pretty large search for major brands on Amazon and on the Google Assistant platform. And most of the research or most of the results came from Wikipedia. So like for GM, Chevy, Microsoft, like just really try it out and see what comes up. But a lot of the brands were still, their answers were still defaulting to the Wikipedia entry.
Another question here, can you invoke Odyssey app directly without the app being open? And the answer is yes, actually. That's because the way that Odyssey implemented the Voicify voice application in their native mobile app actually connects to both Siri Kit and to Google Action Kit. So you can use Google Assistant on Android devices and Siri on Apple devices to actually have Siri command something to Odyssey without the app being active. And then this next one from Robert, how do you think transitioning from a voice first mindset to a voice also mindset should affect interface designs? How should designers be thinking of transitioning between modalities? I definitely have a perspective, but Scott, this is a lot of what Vixen does, so I'd love to give you a first stab.
Well, so our take on voice first has always been slightly different from kind of the larger voice community. So I always see voice first as customer first, and it's really understanding what the core needs of your customer is. And voice happens to be one of the more challenging modalities to design for. So if you think about it as a content period, you would have voice at the very top, and you'd be able to, provide the answer or whatever the relevant information is as succinctly as possible in an audio only format, and then start to think about how you can actually add visuals to reinforce it. But then that same content need will also go into website content, video content, blog content, commercials. And so our main thesis is that while the way you interact with the content is probably going to change from the different modalities and the different interfaces, those core needs are still going to be the same. You still have the same answers during the awareness phase and the consideration phase. So it's just about being intentional and making sure that you're designing things appropriately. And also, to borrow, a term from the responsive web side, is making things progressively enhanced. So as you have devices that are more capable, faster processors, better screens, different connectivity types, things like that, definitely bring those things in. But at the core, it should always be about the information and the content that person's looking for.
Yeah, and I think one of the terms in this question, the idea of transitioning between modalities, is really interesting because in early days when it was just speakers, you really only had to worry about a primary modality, which was audio or verbal, if you'd rather. Yeah. But now with the advent of having assistants embedded within other channels, the idea of multimodality, I think, will continue to gain a lot of attention and interest. And we're working with customers who leverage modalities in really smart ways, where the assistant is actually doing things for the user. As an example, if a visitor to a website is talking with the assistant about the best hiking shoe that they should be using, or getting a recommendation on it, the assistant can not only respond back with the product name, it can also redirect the user to the product page using a visual modality. Of course, there's all those sorts of submodalities or whatever the brand shows on that web page. But then the verbal response and the visual written response can be different, because you always want to be able to offer a visual response. It's not just about speaking back, but actually visualizing it. So you may keep a visual response in terms of confirmation, and this is what I'm doing, very short. The actual language that's on screen to the user doesn't need to match what the user is hearing. And this is a great advantage in taking advantage of the human brain being able to cognitively process multiple things at the same time. And this is one of the things that gets me personally jazzed up about what conversational AI or voice can do, is that we can be smarter about how we're communicating with our customers. Does it take a new level of thinking, a new way of thinking? For sure. I think people that are doing it now are starting to define what those best practices are moving forward, and it'll just become a larger and larger skill set within an organization.
Well, and I think on the backside of that, you also have the intelligence of what your audience is actually searching for in their actual language and word choice. And so one of the things on the web side of things that we've always struggled with was being able to do enough user research to actually figure out how we should label navigation or what we should call products. And so with conversational AI and a lot of these voice interfaces, because we're able to understand the words people are using, that's a huge advantage if you're actually deploying these things in the field. And it's another way that you can actually do almost research by proxy. So I think it's, another huge benefit that largely goes unexplored when we talk about it, but it's almost, I would say, more critical, especially for the business intelligence side, to really understand the word choice and language your audience is using.
Yeah, that's a great point. The analytics around this stuff is really insightful for brands. One last question we've got, and I think this probably is best serviced by you, Scott, says we reviewed a lot of the positives related to the increased adoption of voice, but what does recent research suggest are the key reasons why people are not adopting voice, particularly in-app assistance? I wonder if you have any data around that.
Yeah, so we didn't include it in this presentation, but it's actually in the full report, and there's also additional data that we can share. But it's the concerns around privacy, security, like the usual suspects. Although I will say that when we looked at the data points year over year, most of the concern has started to taper off. And it's certainly for the people that are using the assistants, it's not enough to prohibit them from using it. So the other thing that we did uncover last year, and we see again in the data this year, is this idea of a spatial privacy. So like being a little weirded out talking to your phone or whatever when there's people around, especially if you don't know those people. You're much more likely to do it when you're around friends or family at home. But if you're on public transportation or whatever, people get self-conscious. And so that's something that came out of last year's research, where we uncovered that there's actually two sides of that privacy coin, if you will. So not only what the platforms are doing with my data and all that good stuff, but like physically, is it going to be an awkward interaction if I say something about a medical condition on the bus and then I have everyone looking at me?
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap this up. A special thanks to the Modev team for hosting this and inviting everybody to attend. Kevin, thank you for participating and sharing your perspective in the space and in your business. And Scott, as always, fun to partner with you. So
yeah, likewise.
It was a good conversation. And Jamie, unless you want to close us out with anything, just say thank you to everybody participating and look forward to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank all three of you guys for jumping in and bringing a really great conversation and presentation. Obviously, we're going to see Jason and Scott, Voicify and Vixen, respectively, with us at Voice next month in Arlington. Hope everybody can join us for that. But otherwise, we will follow up with everybody, get folks a copy of the recordings. You can go back and review it. There's a ton of great information that was packed in there. And we just appreciate everybody for jumping in here with us.
Thanks,
Take care, everybody.